Rob Broadhead. I really enjoyed my conversation with Rob. He started as a developer or a programmer, like I did in the 80s. You know, my friend and I taught ourselves programming language like Rob did, and it was really the birth of technology career and future and appreciation. And Rob has done the same, and he's turned his development um, into a great consulting firm. It's called Developreneur, which is developer combined with entrepreneur. Rob's got a great history of, very smart man, high achiever. Tragic story: his wife died of cancer. He's a single father of five children, but what he's done and what he's able to now bring to others. But we have a great conversation on where we think development is going, how security is involved with development, with technology development, with programming, like we used to call it. We do talk about discipline. He has a great synonym for discipline that I've never heard before. A great synonym for it, but it's a great conversation with Rob Broadhead. He's out of the Nashville area. I really enjoyed it. We're kindred spirits in that we have similar backgrounds and similar appreciations. But I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic. I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Rob Broadhead, thank you so much for your time today. Excited to talk to you. When should someone build software versus buying it?
Oh, wow. That is it's almost like a personal question to somebody. Is one, they need to do a little bit of self-assessment. When you go in to build software, it's almost like any, I would say it's like any build versus buy,
Hmm.
because some of it comes down to what's your goal? What do you really want to do? Because sometimes, and how specific do you need to be in that? Because sometimes there's something that you think nobody in the world has ever solved this problem before.
Hmm.
If you do a little bit of research, you find that not only has it been solved, it's been solved in a way that you can get that solution, totally hits your budget, maybe lower than what your budget was.
Hmm.
You get it faster, and it's already been done. If it's built, software it's built. The nice thing about that is it's built by people that they knew that they spent enough time solving that problem that they said, we're going to take our solution and polish it up so that somebody else can use it. And there's going to be, even though you may be able to customize it and do it yourself, even if you are a a software maven or guru of some type that you can really do stuff well, there's still going to be things where you're not going to hit that little wrinkle or that special case, but because they did, and they've had 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 customers, there were all of these iterations to be able to find those little special cases and those outliers, and it's going to be of a higher quality. Versus sometimes it's you are customized enough that it makes sense for the costs that would be involved. It's like, no, it makes much more sense for me to go in and tweak it myself. I mean, think about a good example for a lot of people I think can relate to would be like a template, a Word or an Excel template. There's a lot of times you can go in and you're like, oh, I want a list and I'm ready to go. And I can grab a template, I can fill it out with my data. Cool, I'm off and running. But if I want to do like let's say a resume and I want it to stick out, then that template may almost hold me back.
Mm.
Yeah, that may not, that's maybe my special sauce is how I'm going to present myself. And that template now doesn't allow me to, to bring that specialty to the equation.
With the advent of so many applications out there, what is the old, what was it, like in 1899, the United States Patent Office said, we're going to close down because, right, nothing else can be invented. We've invented everything. But I mean, with the advent, there's just so many applications out there, right? And, I just think of project management, we can rattle them off, right? Basecamp and Monday. Like there's so many of these, you know, is there a case where you actually need to build apps these days from the ground up?
It is really, honestly, the more and I've been doing this for a couple of decades now,
Yeah.
and it seems like the more we go, the further along we go, the less we need to do that. There are still there still are, but it seems if it's got to be like a almost like a niche, very niche kind of problem that you're solving. Because, like you said, like you think of project management, everybody has project management. You think about back office business solutions, even if it's a specific business. I'm amazed at businesses that you think would not be technical, would not have,
Hmm.
anything to them, and yet there may be dozens of products in that industry that are specific tools. Just like, I think, like one that I think a lot of people wouldn't think, unless you're in it, shipping would be, very technical. It's just like you put stuff on on a boat, on a truck or something like that. But the software that's available and the value that that brings to those companies is incredible. So, even if you think you're doing something, it's like, there's nobody that does what I do, or not enough for somebody to actually go money and make money building software. And you'll find out that, oh yeah, they do. There is a solution out there, probably dozens if you start looking. So it's almost the opposite side
Hmm.
of build versus buy. As much of it is like, yeah, some of it's like, do I want to spend the time going through hundreds of products and going through that iteration to find something that the product that I want to buy, versus getting into something and you fall into, buyer's remorse basically.
Yeah, like I mean, that's a perfect example. Shipping. I mean, now I order something. I know what city it's in at what time. I know when it's in the air. I know when it's close to my house. I know it's so detailed. It's right there, and there's so many applications. Like I started writing software in the 80s. We taught ourselves basic. Back then there was assembler. There was the harder part to convince people was to actually get a computer, right?
Yeah.
That was the challenge back then because they had to pay $1,500 for a computer, and then once you get it, we'll be able to put your clients in here and you'll be able to do that. But now you could there's these software as a service, these SaaS applications where you could pay for $5, $10 a user a month, and you're up and running.
Mhm.
It's just so different. So I don't see the need for developers going down. I see it increasing though. Do you agree?
It's a really interesting, almost like, I guess it's almost like a divergence of when you look at particularly probably the last, I'd say probably the last 10 years, maybe not 20, but like, yeah, probably about the last 10 years, where it used to be, and you from your history, that there was like initially there were these like software programs that worked on computers on like a desktop, and then there was the web. There was this and
Right.
so you had web development and you had desktop development, and you still sort of have that. But then there became, particularly with the advent of SaaS, where you have all this software as a service, where it's not always, it's almost never 100%. So there's that configuration, and
Mm.
there's some level of of scripting that goes on, particularly if it's like a big name like a Salesforce or NetSuite or something like that. So you now have these people that are they're not really programmers, they're configurators. They are people that understand that tool. They're like tool specialists, and they do have technical development skills, and sometimes they even have like computer science degrees and backgrounds, and they get into that. But then you have and they can do very well. I mean, you have entire careers that do very well on that. But then because you have these SaaS applications, there's so much that's under the covers that needs to be done that you still need these developers, but they've sort of gone on to other stuff. And so it's getting harder to find those developers that really know how to actually build software from the ground up.
Hmm.
They can do, once you've got them started, you give them a bunch of frameworks and a bunch of tools, they can click buttons and write some code and some stuff like that. But if you get down to actually building, like, the idea of like assembler or something like that, to
Hmm.
even that they even understand those concepts sometimes is foreign. And you can see it, a great example is the technical boot camps that are available all over the place. If you like say, go Google or whatever your search engine is, I want to be a developer, and you'll get all kinds of ads for all of these things, and they'll, like 2 weeks, 10 weeks, 6 months, whatever it is, and they will teach you stuff. And a lot of them are legitimately will get you to a point where you can be hired as a developer. But there's going to be a lot that you're going to miss out of that, and so you're going to be, sort of stuck. And yet you may never know that. You may know it's like, hey, I'm a developer, I work all the time, I've got a full-time job whenever I can find jobs anywhere, and never realize that there's that lower level. It's like everything that's progressed. You think about like automobiles. There was a time that there were people that did really, a lot of people that were really skilled are doing like the hand
Hmm.
crafting of all the parts and stuff like that. And then you get the assembly lines and you get the automation in. And so a lot of those skills, they still, they're there, but they almost have transformed, because now it's not just you have to have that skill. You want to teach something to do that skill. And so it's an interesting transformation as we move forward. But I think we'll always need some level of developers. It's just, I see more and more that you're going to allow the barrier sort of being lowered in some
Hmm.
cases, because which is the goal, is to bring more people in so they understand, not only because now everybody's got a computer on their watch and their
Yeah.
phone, like everywhere, that there is some level of even almost like programming that's available to them, and that allows them to customize it however they want to customize it.
Yeah, I remember back in the '80s and the '90s, Bill Gates, Microsoft said his vision was to have a computer in every home. I mean, that got shattered. You mentioned the auto. Can you imagine the automobile industry? We had carburetors. We had people specialized in carburetors, and that was quickly replaced by fuel injection. I mean, the technology moves on, but even we have the case of Tesla, who has their own C compiler because he was unhappy with the speed of anything that's on the market. So they made their own compiler. So I guess there is kind of some dangers. You mentioned Salesforce and some of these platforms where they're really specialized languages that only work on those platforms. I remember the days of like Windows, XP, where people will get good at it, and then all of a sudden the new version comes out and they found themselves trapped. So I guess there's a danger there. But if you're a very good developer who knows fundamentals of languages, you should be able to kind of transform from platform to platform, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah. There are it's hard to describe what they, I guess there's sort of like mindsets that are different depending on what your platform is sometimes. And you think about like a desktop, you have a different context of the application you're building versus a web application versus like a distributed client server application. So there are some contextual things that you have to adjust from language to language, but you can transition. And a good example, although now it's getting deep into the history, was actually the Y2K problem, is where you
Mm.
had a bunch of people had moved on from that, primarily like that COBOL mainframe technology, and suddenly it's like, hey, we're still running stuff on this, and we've got to change code.
Mm.
And all these people were like, they were coming out of retirement basically, or got into early retirement because they knew that skill, and there was that that sort of short term demand for it. But there's still going to be things like the Tesla, where there are going to be those situations where you say, what is out there is not good enough. And so I'm going to make something better. And that actually goes all the way back to the patent office. It's like, is that's just who we are,
Right.
is we sometimes will get comfortable with something, but sooner or later, somebody's going to say, I can do that better. And it's the same way in software, where there's going to be like, hey, I don't want to buy it. I want to build it. I'm going to do it better. And that's going to make me, better than a competition. Or maybe I'm going to turn around and then I'm going to sell to all my competitors, and
Mm.
I'm going to, because that's my problem I want to solve for the world.
Yeah, the bad thing about technology is it changes every day. The great thing about technology is that it changes every day. I remember some of the first programming. We did event-based programming. So you mentioned client server, right? When you clicked the button, this code was executed, and then we had object-oriented program. And now with the web, we're in this kind of stateless environment where it's waiting for a command. So my point is that it'll keep changing. It'll keep changing, and it'll keep changing, I think, to the better, because we're going to need it. I guess my other question is, Rob, is there's so many platforms out there, and there's going to be new applications developed. There's going to be new, AI is a big buzz term, of course. We could talk about that, but the need for develop I want to still encourage people, the youth, to go into development. I think the video gaming seems to be the entry for the youth to go into to any development. Do you see that trend as well?
Yeah, I do. It's sort of funny because I've got all of my kids are gamer types,
Yeah.
and a couple of them have that was what got them into development type stuff.
Right.
Two of them, graduated with essentially programming degrees and are professional programmers. And
Wow.
part of it was that and it was sort of that same thing, as they were able to customize and extend the games they were playing and do mods, modify their games. And once they realized that, they're like, oh, hey, I've got a fun, it was for them, it was a fun entry
Mm,
into
mm,
programming. And they get to see, it's a little bit it's a little bit deceptive because they get to see the response, like the results, very quickly, and
right.
things like that. Where in software, sometimes you have to put a lot more work into it than that. But it got them introduced to the concepts. It got them excited about it, and then they realized that, hey, I like solving problems. I like doing this. This is a pretty cool thing. And so I agree. I think that there's going to be a need for that moving forward. That we're going to need to have, the next generation is going to have developers. We're going to have to continue to have people that can do that kind of work.
Yeah, one of the first applications I wrote was a game for a bulletin board system. I'm dating myself here, but and this was all based on, hey, if you like the game, here's a PO box I set up. Send us a check, and we would get $20, $30, and over a couple of years, we got a few $1,000s. But it was just kind of on this, base system like that. But it's a good entry in. It just got us hooked, and hey, I could do this. I could understand basic. I think it's a great way to go in. What an interesting history that you have, Rob. I mean, like you mentioned, you have five kids. Your wife passed away from cancer. My condolences, and you're raising these kids yourself. But you were a developer that turned it into this. So often we see developers that aren't very good socially, but you obviously don't have that issue, and you were able to kind of branch it out into this, what you call this developreneur and this site and what you've done. Let's talk about that for a little bit. It's wonderful.
And that actually goes back to that desire to bring more people into
Mm.
it, and not only bring them in, but make them better at it. I mean, that's sort of it was because of Alexa that I added the tagline for the podcast of building better developers, because she doesn't understand developer quite as well when you ask about that. But it really was always sort of an underlying theme, was that we would look around, and this is me and a couple other people that were in the industry at the time, and said, hey, yeah, we're sort of losing that pipeline of people that are coming in.
Mm.
It was, from what the people we talked to and some of the experiences we'd had, it was either they were going off into just configuration, and a lot of times, because that was just sort of where the money was, they thought it's like, hey, I can get a better job here, I can go do this, and
Right.
go down this developer role, or that road. And then there was also just sort of a lack of you started sort of losing some of the natural mentorship leadership that you get in an organization because things are getting a little looser, and especially now when you get remote and things like that, people, you don't have the same sort of like learning by osmosis that you used to get sitting in like a software bullpen with a lot of people that had done it for a while. And you also had, like, a lot of companies where their senior guy had been there 3 years. It was, like, 3 years out of college, and so you didn't have paths for people to advance their careers quite the same way you used to have. And we said, "You know what? Well, let's go find those people where we can and offer something where we can say, 'Hey, here's what we've learned. We want to, talk to you. We want to help you find ways to get better, to improve yourself, and to actually give you sort of the skills to put together a roadmap for your career, because that's almost never, I don't think I've run into any colleges that even really do that. They'll
Hmm.
get hired, but then it's like, okay, you're done. And then 5 years later they'll call you back and say, hey, you're an alumni, give us money. But there's not a lot that really help you focus on a career. And technology in particular is tough because, like you said, it changes so much. Like what I
Mm.
did in college, none of it basically. I mean, I guess I could, but the most, I don't do any of it today.
Right. Right.
Learned everything I do. I've learned, long after college, and that's part of what Developreneur is about. Is saying, hey, if you're really a developer, you probably have an entrepreneurial type spirit. You like solving problems. You have that, a little bit of that vision, and want to find that solution for it kind of skill set. And so we embrace that and say, well, let's use that and your skill sets and sort of combine those in a way that allows you to scratch that entrepreneurial itch, but also advance you along that career path.
Mm. You mentioned, yeah, I was taught COBOL in college, common business oriented language. There's, certainly not being used now, but have the skills that you, developed and learned in software application development. Have you been able to translate them into entrepreneurship and business ownership? Have they
Um,
helped?
wow, it's actually the opposite,
Hmm.
really. Is that it's one of those that when you've got a skill set and you don't really know how to apply it. When I really focused on, particularly it was started before I got my MBA, but I was in a lot of startups, and in startups you wear every hat, or at least you get exposed to everybody like that. And so seeing how business worked and understanding business rules and guidelines and all the different things that go into, compliance and all that kind of stuff that goes into business, and it's particularly of the various business types, allowed me to expand and become a better developer, because now I had more of a goal. I had more context around what I was doing. And it's not, instead of just like writing code almost randomly, it gives you much more ability to have that vision of what it is that you're
Hmm.
building. Because if you just know the code and you don't understand the business, it's hard to have that vision in your head and to connect with your customer and say, which is why there's so often that disconnect, is the business will talk to the technical people, and it's like two different languages. Because in a way it is the technicians have, like, every profession has its special words and meanings and languages.
Mm.
And if you don't spend some time learning that business's language, there's got a lot of stuff that's just it's gonna be a disconnect for you. And that's a lot of what we do in Developreneur, is say, hey, you will, even if you don't want to build your own business, there are a lot of the business building tasks that will make you a better developer, because you will have experienced it and you will be able to now relate and communicate better with your customers. So particularly if you want to go, be like a lead or an architect, or get to like a CIO, CTO, CEO type of position from a technical growth path, you've got to go understand how to take your skills and communicate to others, and also understand what they're trying to communicate to you, so you
Mm.
can actually build a solution that works.
To your point, I remember like the first couple versions of, I'm just going to say it, QuickBooks. You could just tell it was written by software people, not accountants, because the way it was asking questions and the way it was prompting, and then eventually it kind of, took another direction. And Is scope creep the fault of the consultant or the client?
Oh, usually I think there's enough blame to go around everywhere. Um,
So let's define what
I
scope creep is.
Yeah, so scope creep is when you start out with a problem and it changes. And
Right.
this happens, so for example, I think this is a perfect time of year. So if you're going out and you're gonna get one Christmas gift, you're gonna get a Christmas gift for your loved one, and you're out in the store, and especially on like Black Friday or something like that, you see a couple more deals, and the next thing you know, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get a gift for them. I'm going to get for them, and so that that $50 you were going to spend now is $250
Mm,
because you bought all these other gifts. That would be an example of scope creep. Is
mm,
you had one, so it's not always bad. There's actually sometimes scope creep is almost like a saving grace for a product because you can get to a certain point with your initial view and realize that it was too maybe too narrow. And then you get a little further on, you realize, oh my gosh, for this product to work for everybody, we need to have this feature or we need to do this thing. QuickBooks could be an example where they could have gotten to a point where they said, this is great if you are a mathematician coder, but it has like if you're an accountant, you're going to be lost.
right.
And so they would have had maybe some scope creep to change some features and adjust, maybe add some helps, instructions, and stuff like that. And so scope creep is just it's a moving target, and usually
Mm.
it's a growing, because it's that it doesn't creep down almost ever. It creeps into a
Ye-
bigger project as things are, and it's I actually try to put it. I think what I like as a consultant, and even when I'm talking in the developreneur type things, is I like it to be something that should be on the consultant because the business. My goal as a this is partially it's probably a personal thing, but my goal when I go into business is say I want to hear what give me everything. I want like the gold plated perfect solution for you.
mm,
What would that be? Don't no restrictions, because then what I'm going to do is use my experience and understanding of technology to say, okay, this thing that you think is huge is and impossible. Maybe we can get all the way there, but we can get to certain places because there are things that already exist. And so that's not, you don't have to solve those 100 problems you listed out. Those don't all have to be solved. 99 of them maybe have already been solved, maybe in this software package right over here.
mm.
And so to me, it's like being a legal advisor. It's one of those things. It's like, hey, you're not expected to understand the technology piece as much as a business owner. So the consultant, that should be part of what they're providing, is saying, hey, at least warning flags to say, hey, if you do this, this is going to adjust the timing, it's going to adjust the cost, and as much as possible, that's part of why early on you want to understand what is your why for the software, what is your value, what is the actual business value of doing this project or buying that product, because then you've got a hopefully like a hard number that says, hey, this is going to save us $100,000 this year. So if building the product costs us 150,000, then that means we're going to lose this year. So we have to factor in, okay, is that good for the long run, is it just 1 year? But now you've got hard numbers and you can say, okay, no, we can't, that's not feasible, we can't do that. And so you rein it back down and you adjust the scope. And then it's you try to narrow it, you try to as anybody, you try to underestimate a little early on and say, okay, something's going to go wrong, we know it's going to creep up to some extent, so you got to get below whatever your tolerable scope creep level is,
Mm.
so that you're allowed to go in there and not end up in a situation where it's like, okay, we're 90% of the way done on our product and we're 100% or 110% of the way done on our time and our money. Now what do we do? Because that's the worst thing that anybody ever could fall into, because it's just such a almost a lose-lose proposition.
Yeah, and I've been there in the early stages where, the documentation wasn't quite where it should be, and there was, expectations weren't managed correctly. I guess that's, the next question to that should be, the MVP, the most viable product, agree to that, so you may continue. Let's talk about MVP. Do you use it often?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of MVP, and I often bring up what's called the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule.
Hmm,
And that's the concept that 80% of you can get 80% of the way there on a project with 20% of the effort, but that last 20% takes 80% of the effort. And it sort of feels, I think, yeah, I don't know what the scientific real basis for that but it does feel sort of right. It's like, you can get pretty far, but it's like especially in software, it's you get into those details and they just suck up time,
they
and they
do.
just like web development's like a perfect one. If you've ever sat even trying to like line up font and or push something 2 pixels, it can take an hour to do that,
Yes,
where it
yes.
took you 5 minutes to put most of the content on the screen. And that's the same way with software. That's where MVP, I think, is strong. As you say, what is the bare minimum? What is the thing that we so that that situation I just laid out, where you're 90% of the way there and you're past your budget, you say, okay, let's roll it all the way back. Let's not worry about your budget as much. Let's get the most basic, low end, like cover, like checks off the boxes product that we can. And then when we get to that point, we've got a decision where we can say, oh, okay, this is deliverable, or we have some more wiggle room. So now we can move forward on that. And it almost becomes an iterative process in itself. So you do a minimum viable product, and then you could say, all right, maybe in a lot of cases, like, hey, let's ship it. We need revenue. We need to start bringing money. So we'll put it out there. It's 1.0. We'll tell our customers that we're going to bring and do enhancements. We already know what they are, and we're off and running. And now we can sort of bootstrap going forward. And then sometimes you get to a point where it's like, okay, we've gotten this far. This looks good. We don't need to ship it right now. So let's find that next level of MVP. Is okay, here's some more stuff that these features are we'll call them a family of features
Mm,
that will kick us up to the next level. And it's not too much effort. It's something we really understand how to get to that next effort, that next level. And that allows you to sort of keep it under control, so you don't have this huge project that you're starting with and then trying to estimate all that. You have something much smaller that's much more manageable, and then you're managing smaller iterations on top of that.
that's interesting, Rob. I never thought of that. So you're saying there's different layers of MVP. I just kind of thought that once there's MVP, that's it. Then we're going to add features on top and it's done. But you're saying there's kind of different levels of it. It's fascinating.
It can be. It's usually not. Usually it is as you've seen it. As it's an MVP, because usually what happens is somebody says, "I have a product that has value to customers.
Mm,
I'm going to ship it.
right.
I'm going to get it out there." And so it's version 1.0. But there are situations where you've particularly where because things change. So there may be, like, for example, well, like, this is a good time, like, when you're going around, like an elections occur, and so governments change or directions change, or you have, like, I don't know, a pandemic, or you have
Mm,
recessions, or you have all these things. So that while you're building that product, the the context, the world changes enough that you get to that MVP and you say, I don't know that I really want to do this. Or you look at it and you realize that, oh no, this is something that somebody could actually reproduce very quickly and very cheaply. So we need to, we'll say, secure it a little more by
mm.
putting a little more value into it. And that actually does become it is a dangerous sort of slippery slope, because there is that, um, depending on who the product owners are, sometimes it's something where you're like, I want it to be like perfect. And so you end up constantly iterating
Right.
when you could have actually had that to market 6 months ago. So it's yeah, it is something that is rarely used, because, like I said, once you tell somebody you could sell that, you can make money, and especially if they've been spending money for months, like, sell it, put it, like, book it. Let's get out there. Let's send some invoices, because we want to see revenue coming in, and then and it is benefit, because now you've got that revenue coming in that can now fund those future enhancements, and you have customers using it, and they will feed you information about,
That's right.
hey, this, add this feature, do this, these are the things that are important to us. So while you can, it's yeah, I think in most cases, if it's done right, you're going to do that MVP, and you're at least going to get out to like a beta group or something. Because what you want is you want your customers to get it in their hands, get their feedback, make sure that you can validate all of the assumptions that you made when you built this. And this is rather it's like commercial software that you're going to sell to others, or internal software you're building for your company that's
Mm.
just your employees are going to use.
Yeah, we talk about building that roadmap and it continually change. Is software ever done?
Mm. There are there are there's software that's like one and done. There are things, they have a very limited purpose. But even those, I think, sort of find a way to sort of resurrect at some point.
Yeah,
So I don't know that it is because things change. So even
mm,
if like a lot of one and dones would be like a data migration. So let's say
I see.
you migrated from QuickBooks to
Whatever.
I don't know, whatever, like
Great
QuickBooks in the
Plains.
cloud,
Yeah,
and or to Great Plains, and then 5 years down the road, you go, oh, now we're going to go to Microsoft, and
sure.
so now you're going to convert, and maybe some of that code lives on. Maybe it's completely new, but I mean, I ran into a company not too long ago that it was a very challenging project, and they had like core software to them that their business had not changed, and they like, this works, this is what we need, this is exactly what we need, we don't need any features, we don't it there's no real bugs, we're good. So to them it was done, and to the point that they lost track of all the developers and everything. And then you flash forward about 6 to 8 years, and things have changed enough that the actual underlying software system, the operating systems, didn't exist anymore. What it
Hmm.
was written on was not supported. Not only could you not, was it not like current, it was like it wasn't even supported. It was
Wow.
not secure. And when they went to the point of actually upgrading that, most of the tools and the libraries that were used as part of that had disappeared long ago as well.
Hmm.
And they ran into a situation where they thought they were done, and they weren't. And they ended up it's one of those things, they ended up basically having to almost scrap it and rewrite it from scratch with a whole new group, because it was one of these things very specific to that company. They built it. It was very specific to them. It was very efficient for them. But because of that, you got to keep those people that know it. Have got to be around and be able to pass that on to the next generation of staff, or else you run into that kind of a problem.
How has security or attacks, changed development?
I I don't think it's changed it enough. In the last couple of years, it is starting to get a lot more. I almost want to say, I don't know if respect is quite it, but it sort of is. For a long time, it was it's sort of like testing used to be as well. It's things like, you don't really need that because, and it was always, well, we're too small. Yeah, nobody cares about us. Nobody in the other side of the world is going to attack us. They're going to go after
Mm,
IBM or
mm,
Microsoft. But then
not
you
the
start
case.
seeing in the news that
Yeah.
all of these attacks, and the the phishing types of attacks that are out there are, like, I'm
Vicious.
astounded at some of this stuff. Like the ones, I've heard of one that I just started up a couple of years ago, where they would basically reach out to somebody and convince them to sell their house, and they would they would have documents and everything, and all their money would go somewhere and to buy a house, and then that house was not theirs. It wasn't actually, it was
Jeez.
all faked all the way through the process. And it's stuff like that where people lose, it's huge amounts of personal wealth that can be lost. And they pick on people, you get a lot of these elderly and
Elderly,
that
yeah.
are picked on for that. And that's not all, software stuff, but it shows you that if you're out there and you've got a product, it can be, and probably at some point will be attacked.
Hmm.
And so now finally it's becoming enough of an, I think it had to be enough of a concern at the higher levels of management for them to start mentioning that and say, hey, when we're building this, are we secure? What happens if we get attacked?
Hmm.
What happens if somebody tries to hack us? And so it's becoming more and more, it's almost like, it's sad, but it's almost like everybody's now gotten mugged. So they're a little different. It's like
Right.
everybody's a little different before and after.
Right.
And it's that same kind of thing. We're like, okay, either I have, or my company, or somebody I know has run through this. And so now security is becoming a bigger thing. And it's starting to become, just in the last year or two, I've seen stuff where there are discussions about how do you secure stuff from the start
From the
when you're
code.
building software, so that it's just like now, for years, software has always assumed that you're on a network, that you have the internet out there. Now they're starting to assume that we're going to be attacked, that security is an issue,
Mm.
that we need to find ways to not only secure our systems, but to help our users keep our systems secure. So, if Jim Bob over there that has a password that's password, that we're protecting our system, even if he's out there, that we've got ways to, either say, hey, this is not a useful password, try something like this. And, have that, almost that security mentality is starting to become a part of it.
Absolutely. Simply by adding multi-factor authentication and these kinds of things stops 80, 90% of those attacks. But, you hear these companies that got attacked, that got hacked, and then they say things like, we've rewritten every line of code to address security. And obviously that's a bit of hyperbole, but uh, they are taking it seriously because, ransomware is terrible out there. And even you see in many colleges, like they're trained, like there's classes for the students, not even in coding, just with for security jobs. I mean, it's becoming, you know, lucrative, for the universities and for the salaries. You got a lot of great content, Rob, on your podcast, on your YouTube site. I really like the data scraping. I watched that intently, and it's so common that we just, we want to get the data that's on the screen, and we want to scoop it up, and we want to put it in our database, and we want to mine it, and we want to do it. It's more difficult than it seems. If you have the developer mentality, it helps certainly. But why did you approach that particular subject?
Because it really has become so common. I
Yeah.
have, in the last couple of years, I bet 75 to 8% of the work that we've had, that the requests have included, at least, if not been entirely, a data scraping type of integration of some sort, of a project. And so it was one of those things that I realized that it just wasn't, there's a lot of specific, like if you want to do this kind of things out there, but I think it's one of those areas that now that people talk about it, particularly if you're thinking, hey, we can just go scrape data and pull this in because we need to build a customer database or something of those lines. It was worth it to say, particularly to, to my audience, to say, hey, there's a lot of ways that you can do this,
Mm.
and there are a lot of things that are gotchas that you may run into. And so, set the expectations properly to say, hey, we can go, like, there's all kinds of government sites that have tons of data that people say, hey, that's very useful to us, and that they're 100% correct. But government data is like everything else in the government. It's not always, super clean. And then they may change their site. There's things that can happen that will mess that process up. And so you have to, you want to go into that saying, hey, that's great. If you want to scrape that data, that's cool, but it's not easy.
Mm.
And it tends to be fragile unless there's, I mentioned, there's like a formal application program interface where you have an API that you can use or something, or sometimes they'll even allow you like exports and downloads loads in a Excel or CSV or XML format or something, so that you have a static structure that you can work from. But the rest of it, especially if you're doing it sort of on the sly, which is what a lot of people do, is like,
Yeah.
hey, I want to go, like, I want to grab a little data here, grab a little data there, because I want to be, it's not illegal. It's just they're saying, hey, I want to, instead of me going to all these sites and pulling all this data in, I want an automated process that'll do it, so I can be sort of a clearinghouse for this kind of data. And that stuff tends to be very tedious to go
Yes.
through, which makes
Yes.
it can be time consuming and far more expensive than some people think. But also sometimes it's cheaper than you think, and it's actually an easier route to go through than trying to go hit a bunch of sites or something like that.
Yeah, collecting that data, and and the web designers that, they're very good at kind of hiding what you see, in the code, and because they're hip to it, they understand what's happening. It's a very interesting subject, and uh, there's even some scrapers out there that you could try to buy commercially, and with varying degrees of success. But it's a fascinating topic. So on the podcast, Rob, a bunch of when I started my business back in the 90s, it was a we called it programming back then, and also network support. I gained a lot of weight, right? And I wasn't paying attention to myself. And then the doctor said, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. You're pre-hypertensive. So I lost a lot of weight. People ask me how, like there's some secret. I always say discipline. I got focus, I got discipline. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life.
Oh, it is, well, and like, you mentioned is I have, my kids are getting older, but I have for the last, 15 years, definitely, it's been a very busy life when you're
Yeah.
working and you've got side hustles going, you got family and all that kind of stuff. To me, I don't know that I could have done it without discipline
Hmm.
because I talk a lot about the idea of like momentum, even in anything, any hobby, habit, activity, that you've got to keep doing it. And once you build that momentum, it becomes easier to do it. And it is that discipline. It starts out very much heavily relying on your discipline to do this, today, tomorrow, the next day. But over time, it becomes easier. But it is still, now it's almost like an ingrained discipline. It's like if you want to, like, for exercise, you can just go, walk today. I'm going to go walk for 5 minutes. And maybe that's tough. That could be something that's very difficult for you, but then you do it for a while. And now it's like, hey, I can go 10 minutes and then I can go 20 minutes. And now I can run a while and things like that. It's like if somebody's going to go run a marathon, they're not going to turn around and do it tomorrow. They're not going to be sitting around doing nothing and say, okay, I'm going to go run 26 miles
Mm.
tomorrow. And instead, they're gonna start walking and running, and they're gonna run a little further and a little further. And that's the discipline that I use. It's been, to grow as well. It's that have a goal, and it may be a very big goal, but then it's find a path to get there. So I'm at least moving towards that. And that gives me I call it that momentum. It's like, hey, I have at least been moving forward on
Hmm.
it. And now it becomes more natural to do that. So that extra work I did, whether if I get up a little, stay up a little later, get up a little earlier, or I eat different meals, or I take a different path to work, or whatever it is, it's like those things start to ingrain in you. And now you have what you end up doing. Eventually you have like a new, sort of like basis for where you start. And now you can grow off of that as well. So
Hmm.
it becomes easier, and you can actually take bigger strides and do bigger things. Software, perfect example. We start
Right.
out doing really simple, like adding two numbers, and now look what we have. So, over time you reset your foundation and you're able to grow off of that.
Yeah, I remember when learning a new language, the big thing was hello world, right? How do you say hello to the world? That was but you're a very high achiever, Rob, in that, you're a developer, you're an entrepreneur as well. You're highly educated with the MBA you mentioned. I mean, I wonder, did you did you consider yourself disciplined, or did you just kind of go about doing it?
Mm. Yeah, the idea that it was discipline probably didn't occur to me
Right.
until, you know, not too long ago. So that's where I was like looking back and saying, well, I guess that's, we could call that discipline.
Right. Right.
Because, but it's, I think some people refer to it, and I usually thought of it as drive, as something more that's like is that I would set a goal and I'd be driven towards it. But because of that, it is a discipline kind of thing. It's the same thing. It's like you set a goal and you want to stick to it enough that you're going to keep moving forward. That's where that discipline comes from. A girlfriend says that she wants to lose weight. There's a point where she'll be like, "Yeah, that donut looks really good, but it's not going to be good as I will feel not eating that donut, and I'll
Mm,
feel a week from now when I can fit into the right dress or something like that." So
right.
it's one of those that it's and it a little bit it is it's a I've heard of it one time of people focused on the future more than necessarily the now. And it really is. It's keeping that goal in mind. So even now, while it's like, hey, I would love to just sit around and have a bag of potato chips, but I'm trying to lose weight. It's remembering that, hey, if I do this, then I'm not going to feel as good later.
Mm.
And so I'm better investing in me now by not eating the potato chips, and I'm going to feel better about it later. And that applies to just about everything we do. It's like I'm better if you want like a better family life. It's like I'm better spending some time talking to them now as opposed to going out for a poker game or whatever it happens to be. It's like it's figuring out those trade-offs and understanding what your goals really are.
Yeah, I like that. The synonym you used is drive with discipline. Yeah, that's I like that a lot. I like that a real lot. Uh, Rob, what motivates you?
Um, well, actually, the bottom line, what motivates me is when I get done with life, I want to know that I've lived life that I have. I don't. It's one of those I want to leave it all on the field kind of thing, and it's
Mm,
not. It's not quite to the level of like I just want to be, burn the candle on both ends and be exhausted, but I want to be able to look back and say that I did what made sense for me to do in my life, that I became what I was meant to be in my life and didn't waste it basically. And so uh, it becomes its own, it's sort of natural to become disciplined at that point because there's things that typically the things that you regret, I guess, that are the empty calories or the wasted time is less of an issue when you're embracing the time that you take. So it's like, hey, if I want to be present in what I'm doing, and so those all sort of feed together to just be something to say, hey, I get up every day. I look forward to it. I was like, hey, it's another day. What am I going to get done today? What do I want to do? And I've got, I'm like everybody, I've got like bucket list items and all that kind of stuff. I just sort of work my way through that. And it's instead of, I was talking about the other day, instead of it being like an annual New Year's resolution thing, it's almost like a daily thing. It's like, what am I going to get done today? And go get it done. And then you get to the end of the day and you're like, wow, this is a great day.
mm,
I got this done. I had a good time and whatever it is. And then that in itself is that momentum that you're like, hey, I can do this again. I can do it again. Cause some days you look forward to it. You're like, this is not going to be a good day. And you
mm.
get done, you realize, no, it was actually a really good day.
That's inspiring. And how do you measure success?
Oh, um, I really, it's hard. I really don't
Hmm.
because it keeps changing. I guess the best measure of success to me, personal success, is contentment. Actually, it's like contentment bordering on joy. I guess is because there is a. I guess to me, if you're content, you're going through the motions, you're happy enough, and stuff like that. Actually, it's probably a level above that where it's like happiness or joy, because it's not only am I where I'm at and I can do this for the rest of my life and I end the day not too drained, but also I end the day feeling like fulfilled and energized and ready to hit the ground running the next day. So it's probably it's almost like a yeah, I guess a contentment bordering on joy would probably be my measure
Mm.
of success.
It's fascinating. It's like a moving target for you.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Rob Broadhead, thank you so much. You know, I, I think we both started as developers, and it just sparked our interest in technology, and then it just sprang off, into so many directions. What you've done, it's just, I really appreciate the insight there, and I just don't think I would have as deep as much of technology as I do now if I didn't start, learning how they work that way. I think we have a big advantage that way. But thanks so much for your time today. How can we get in touch with you?
The probably there's two ways that it can easily get in touch with me, which is developreneur.com, as we've got all kinds of stuff there. You can contact us. And then there's also rb-sns.com. That's just the letter R, letter B, a hyphen, Sam, Nancy, Sam.com. And that's a consulting company. And you can get me at rob@rb-sns.com, or just nice, simple info@developreneur.com. Happy to answer questions, talk to people, have conversations like this any old time.
Yeah, and developreneur is a combination of developer and entrepreneur. If you're not quite getting that, listeners, but yeah, the kind of you made a new word there, but it's the amalgamation of those two words, which I appreciate it. Rob, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Next time I'm in the general Nashville area where you are, we'll get a cup of coffee and talk about programming in the '80s.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, man. This has been a blast.
You be well. Take care.
You too.
Bye now. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the Video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciplined Conversations.